All right, well, I want to give thanks for being able to present this material tonight and talk about this with you. This is an important lecture. You know, they're all important, of course, but this lecture is kind of a one-pointed lecture about one particular concept. And it really, I think, is a beautiful marriage of the spiritual and psychological aspects of the path work. Now, the main concept here is something that the guy talks about in a lot of lectures. This concept of anesthesia between incarnations. It's called Reawakening from Pre-Incarnatory Anesthesia. And there's a metaphor that's used a lot. Let's say that you're a rich man, and you want to find out what it's like to be poor, but you want to really know it. In other words, you want to experience the despair of not having anything. You want to experience the deep emotions that come to somebody who is really up against it, pain and suffering, victimhood maybe. But if you're a rich man and you go into a poor neighborhood and you live with a poor family and you live like a poor person, you always know that you're really rich, right? You know who you are. So you don't get the impact of understanding and going through something that you would have if you didn't have that knowledge about who you really were. So at least that's an introductory metaphor to introduce this concept of why it's necessary for our memories to be wiped, so to speak, before birth. Because the guide says that if that didn't happen, then what he calls the positive aspects, the developed aspects of ourselves would overwhelm the undeveloped aspects. Just in the same way that the knowledge of a rich person, that he's really rich and he has a yacht and he has a private island, would overwhelm the experience he would have of being poor. So he wouldn't be able to work on those aspects of him where he might need to benefit from learning something different about his experience or about the world or about his emotions. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Okay. So
very well said. It's a beautiful metaphor.
This lecture is divided into three sections, the way I see it. The one is about this concept of anesthesia and how it develops and how it works. The second is about the separated aspects of the self. And then the third is about how someone lives when they're connecting more to the unitive state. They're going through their negativities. They're able to transcend their negativities, what it's like to live that way. All right. So I'm just going to give a summary and then we can talk about this lecture. Guide says, paragraph 3, all knowledge is in you. Now that's a very interesting phrase, I think, right? All knowledge is in you. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, on one level, I think we could talk about knowledge that has to be woken up, knowledge that is innate but not known in this life. You know, like if you've read there's a Platonic dialogue where Socrates proves that a young slave boy actually knows mathematics without ever having learned it. And it's something similar. In other words, we know a lot of things we know, but they're buried. But this whole idea that all knowledge is in you is really quite an interesting and challenging thing to say, right? Okay. Now, but we have to selectively not know certain things in order to work on our issues. And that's why there is this pre-incarnatory anesthesia that sets in. All right. Now, the guide talks about in the first paragraph that there's a life plan. And he touched on this, I think, in the last lecture too, where he talks about the stages of a life plan and things unfolding in an orderly way if you don't block your energies and your currents. In other words, you know, everything develops, right, in an organic way. Things that are alive, animals develop, plants develop, but if their growth is stunted in some way, then development becomes arrested. And I think a lot of this pathwork is recognizing that there are parts of our development which have become arrested and trying to understand why that happened. So he says, at first you focus on material life. You learn to walk, handle objects, you speak, you learn reading, writing, numbers, basic laws of outer life. Once basic material knowledge is mastered or reawakened, deeper knowledge is reacquired, provided that the growth process takes place as planned. So that's an interesting thing also, as planned, right? In other words, there are ways in which we don't grow, we branch off, we don't actualize the growth process that we are meant to, right? And the way I see it is that, you know, when people get trapped in their images, compulsive patterns, recreation of childhood hurts, as one of the lecturers says, when we do that, we arrest our plan of development and growth. So when we become obsessive about certain things, when we can't leave material things alone, let's say, to focus on the spiritual, when we become fixated on stages that we should go through and transcend, then we're not following that life plan that was laid out for us, that we potentially could follow. In other words, bad choices, right? Okay, so now, and the guide says in paragraph 4, if the person has stopped the movement of the growth process, his life train, that interruption will prevent the reacquisition of knowledge he or she possesses in a potential state, right? So the way I see that is, when we don't allow ourselves to have the courage to face our lower self aspects, when we make easy choices, which appear to be easy choices, like road of least resistance, right? Then we cannot reacquire that knowledge that we had before birth, that we're meant to reacquire. You know, the anesthesia can't wear off. We're not letting it wear off. And the guide returns to that later on in the lecture, where he says something specifically about that. You know, that we make a choice not to grow and develop in the life plan that we're supposed to, that we perhaps planned before birth. All right. So the guide then recaps why anesthesia sets in. You're deliberately anesthetized. All plans for your life on the material plane are thoroughly discussed and assimilated. After that, you lose consciousness. So in other words, the guide says that in full consciousness of who we are, we make plans to do certain things in this life. And then, boom, we're anesthetized. And then we have to reacquire the inspiration and the knowledge to go through that, experience that life plan, let that life plan unfold that we agreed to, that we planned to accomplish. And he says, of course, that the process of anesthetization is copied from the spirit life, remembered and rediscovered in earthly life. On earth, its purpose is to prevent pain during an operation. In the case of the incarnatory process, the reason is different. So that's interesting, right? But obviously the anesthesia that we experience in the hospital is a good metaphor. It's very similar, but different from this pre-incarnatory anesthesia. All right. So then after birth.
Diametrically opposite. In the hospitals, prevent pain.
We're looking for the pain.
It's to
Yeah,
allow the pain
yeah,
to
that's a
come
very
through.
interesting
right.
point, Tracy, right? That we're supposed to, right, exactly,
We're
that we
supposed to-
are,
later on the guide in one sentence.
yeah,
So if we don't have this anesthesia, then the parts of ourselves that are already purified would carry along, if you will, the unpurified parts.
Yeah.
And they would never have a chance to rise to the surface and
Right.
manifest. And therefore we would never.
right. So we have to experience the pain, that's
Right.
right, here on earth. So it's kind of the opposite, because we're in a sense exposing ourselves to pain that we wouldn't have felt.
Right. So the
In the
suffering is
spirit
what
world.
wakes us up.
Right. Okay. So then page 2, the guide says in the first 20 to 25 years, 22 to 20, I'm sorry, years, he says, we focus on acquiring outer knowledge. Then after that time, more or less, 20 to 25 years, Then we gather spiritual and psychological knowledge. All right, then there's a paragraph about how some people who are more highly developed can awaken to their spiritual knowledge earlier. He says, you have children on your path who early in life begin to acquire and comprehend inner knowledge. This can happen because the knowledge is near and deeply anchored into the soul. In previous lifetimes, it had become such an integral part of the entity that it is easier to reawaken than in others without such previous development. And this is the key sentence, who must still go through processes of growing, searching, and struggling before the inner knowledge penetrates every particle of the soul. This, of course, is what life is all about. Right, so that struggle is really what life is all about. What it's all about, what we're doing, is doing that growing, searching, and struggling for the inner knowledge. So all of it is necessary. The groping process, the process of trial and error, searching, often being confused and not knowing, dealing with the not knowing in a constructive way. Finding the often precarious balance between patience and humility for the grace of knowledge to communicate itself on the one hand, and serious commitment, endeavor, focused will, and healthy aggression on the other. This process is the key. So this is reflected in many lectures, you know, that there's alternating states of consciousness that are necessary to create something, allow something to develop. In this case, he talks about the balance between patience and humility. In other words, you have to be passive in a sense. You have to allow knowledge to filter into your consciousness. You have to allow it to kind of, you have to, and then the other side is more active. He talks about this later. Serious commitment, endeavor, focused will, and healthy aggression. Those are the things that allow us to claim these aspects of consciousness that we're trying to that we're reawakening. You know, the effort of the will, the focus, good choices. All right. So the guide later on in this page talks about this concept that we are familiar with from other lectures, this idea that the purpose of existence is to fill the void with consciousness, right? You think about that, right? I mean, the void. I just see like a huge expanse of blackness, like between the galaxies, and light somehow begins to fill this expanse. And there are aspects of consciousness, us. And not only that, on a deeper level, aspects of within each of us that come out into the darkness and have to shine and have to define themselves against the darkness, right? So it's interesting because, you know, I'm a science fiction fan, right? And all this science fiction stuff about colonizing other worlds and not letting humanity die and allowing the race to spread and colonize other worlds in the galaxy, that's exactly what this is. It's a metaphor, the same thing. In other words, we can't let the spark die, right? We have to spread the spark of life. So just as, and it's also interesting, it's a real parallel here when you think about it. Because like in science fiction, there's all these stories about these starships that go to other planets and things go wrong. You know, like things get twisted and distorted. Some colonies don't work out, things don't happen properly. They don't unfold the way they should. But Earth keeps on sending these voyages out into star systems. And slowly, you know, through trial and error, these colonists or, you know, particles learn how to develop and grow and spark new fire and new life on those other worlds. You know, right? So if I'm not getting too far afield here, ladies and gentlemen, what is this but a metaphor for not only the human being venturing into the darkness, which is what? That's psychic darkness. That's self-will, pride, and fear. That's the principles of evil. Those are the psychic darknesses that we are trying to fill, and we're trying to ignite a fire and purify those aspects. So The guy talks about mass consciousness spreads, filling the void. As it does so, particles of consciousness lose themselves. The essential divine consciousness in its beauty, wisdom, and benign power functions in a limited and distorted way. So in other words, when we, ladies and gentlemen, when we have the guts and the will to incarnate here, we are exposing ourselves to darkness, and it's scary. And we are carrying light into this world of matter. You know, matter is also an aspect of darkness. So we're here, and as he says, particles of consciousness lose themselves. The essential divine consciousness in its beauty, wisdom, and benign power functions in a limited way. The isolated particles must seek to unite again with the forward rushing, spreading movement of the divine state of life that inexorably fills the void. In this process, the separated particles, which are individual entities, that's us, must find the way back on their own by dint of reawakening the divine potentials always present, even in the most separated aspects. So, as I mentioned before, just as we are trying to purify ourselves, right, as men and women here on this difficult, often problematic, chaotic, often tragic world, so are aspects of ourselves trying to purify themselves, right? Now, the guy talks about page 3. On your path, you constantly discover aspects of negativity, irrationality, childishness, selfishness, destructiveness. You know that these aspects flare up at an early stage of your development by themselves without provocation from outside. But these aspects of ourselves are the things that we have come here to purify, right? And I think what the guide is saying here, I was trying to get my head around this, is that each of these aspects is sort of like an individual being in itself. Would you agree, Kevin?
Very much so.
And that
I'll go there later.
You'll go there later.
Continue.
And that these aspects, which of course he says are negativity, irrationality, childishness, selfishness, destructiveness, I'm sure there are others, they each have their own mission to purify themselves and kind of come back into oneness. So whenever we are able to unify a split, like to heal an image, that one of those aspects is purifying itself, is reintegrating itself with the unitive principle. And then that aspect can rejoin, as it were, the rest of us. And we all are accomplishing a lot on our path.
And the energy that was being used for it is then being able to be used to raise our consciousness.
Right. Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah, do you want to address that? Or Kevin, do you want?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you've been hinting at, and the lecture itself hints at very strongly, is the fragmentary nature of consciousness, at least manifested consciousness. The very basis of this lecture has to deal with the manifested fragmentation. And I think when we consider fragmentation, I think it's important we don't wrap ourselves too strongly on the concepts of what we believe our ego to be or our individual nature to be. Because once we can see and blur the fact that, let's just say the Kevins of the world or the Allens of the world, or, you know, anyone really, those names or those positions within family or those bodies or however we want to identify our social structure or whatever, they're just a conceptualization of the fragmentary nature of manifested consciousness as it comes within this physical realm. So what the guide is constantly referencing throughout this, I feel, is don't be so sure that it's you that is against something else, or that it's you that needs to be purified, or that it's trying to pull you constantly out of the you in this lecture. And it's constantly reminding you that within you is a host of many different types of, well, Alan actually said it, right? Different types of almost beings, in a sense, that have their own very nature, and that they can't, like, that's what one of the hardest parts of the path work has been for me personally, has been, as I've walked the path and understood it mentally or conceptually, that I find myself not living it.
Oh, that's me.
Okay, well, it's everyone, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you just find yourself one day going, wait, I thought I understood. Well, I understand that, but no, that's not me today. And well, or that's not me in this moment, or that's not me. Well, then who am I? And so it can drive you into obviously some kind of psychotic fit, but that's not the point. The point is to recognize that where we placed our anchor into our identity is not actually where the anchor should reside, right? The anchor resides in the totality, even if the manifestation must be for the dance of creation to be within the fragment, okay? And so acknowledge the awareness of the fragment at the same time as acknowledging your truth in the totality. And if you can make that balance, that's what the lecture constantly is drawing me to, that is the call to balance those two things, and whatever level of the path you might be on, or whatever. I think he talks about the development of what a soul is, right? Each person has their own development when they incarnate, it says repeatedly. So you seek that balance at the level that's commensurate with what you yourself feel to be, I guess, honest or true to your own nature. And some might seek that balance in a very different form than others, but that's okay, because everyone's seeking their own balance in their own way, hopefully. And we can hopefully help each other recognize, I think, the totality in all of us at the same time as acknowledging that individual aspects of our very nature still live on and captivate us. They draw us almost daily or hourly into different frames of mind that, if we deny that, then we're not good parents, or we're not good, husbands or wives, or we're not good, we fail at something, or we feel bad about something. But to be honest, we all fail. We all fail at a variety of things. So I feel like this lecture really speaks to that.
Tracy, do you want to say something?
Well, I got my mind around this because it was the first time that I really think I understood why we have to go through this amnesia. Why can't we just, what we've learned, kind of pick up in the next incarnation from that point? And besides what I said earlier, the guide also explained it in one or two sentences towards the end of the lecture, where he said that if we were somehow to be able to live in a place where, it was all, lovey-dovey and everything was fine and nobody was nothing and nobody was pinging us, then our unpurified parts of ourselves would never be seen in the light. They could just sort of ride along with, all the goodness that was around us, sort of like it is here when everything is going right. Maybe we're on vacation, we're sitting on the beach, we have pina colada in our hand, we were looking at the water, nobody's bothering us. We don't usually get pinged that much, we don't usually get scratched at that much. But as soon as we have to start to interact back into the world with, people, Joel and I have this sort of funny expression: if it wasn't for the others, everything would be just great. But the others are actually, the very thing that brings out in us the areas that we have to look at ourselves. So it's very important for all of that unpleasantness to happen, because the only way we ourselves are ever going to get, our own consciousness raised to a point that maybe we would be able to have an incarnation in what maybe would be called a subtle sphere, where everybody there is at a higher vibration. It's because we're consistent with that. You know, all parts of ourselves are consistent with it. So we wouldn't be able to go there if we weren't vibrating at the same frequency. We just wouldn't fit in. So I never really got that until this morning. I think I read this lecture maybe 20 times, and finally, including last night and this morning, and finally this morning, I read it again, and it penetrated. Finally, it penetrated. So thank you, because it was because of you. It was because you were saying that you were struggling with it. So I thought to myself, well, I really have to try and be able to, understand it myself completely. So that was a gift you gave me.
Okay, so that's talking about the second section here, the separated aspects. And just to recap what he says, you do live in the world of matter, in which under even the best of circumstances, life is not easy. Matter obstructs and frustrates. How'd you like that for a sentence,
Yeah.
right? Matter obstructs and frustrates.
Yeah.
The very fact of living in this dimension of reality, which is your production of course, is always a challenge. Imagine that you lived under circumstances so sublime, favorable, and bliss-producing that even the worst in you would not find occasion to express itself.
That's the sentence I was looking for.
Then the worst in you would remain dormant, unexposed, and would not go through its necessary process of purification. So, as the guide says, the blurred areas in you would ... They need exactly to be triggered off. They need the exposure and the provocation. By the same token, if you were consciously to know all you know, with no provocations from outside, the undeveloped aspects would not flare up and would not acquire their own ingrained knowing.
So just pause for a second. Let me add one thing.
Yeah.
That the seeking that the guide is discussing here, it's a weird word. It's a human word of fairness, but the fact that we're all in a sense anesthetized and asleep in that initial process, and that we all come to the level that we are developmentally ready to come to within this incarnation, is a generous and a very gentle way of opening our eyes to those aspects within ourselves that wish to rebel or to say fuck you or whatever it is that screams at us and says, you know what, I don't give a fuck, I don't want to be a part of God's creation, I just want to live this life, or whatever it is. That part that's awakening, it's literally awakening right in that moment when it's screaming obscenities. And it's very generous. It's very, well, it's in a way, it's the nature of our being overlaid on top of unitive consciousness, right? It's the nature of what we were called to dance and to figure things out. And why that happens, who the heck knows? But the fact of the matter is that as you integrate, right, as you let go of those areas that wish their own individual existence and demands, the appreciation of life grows. The ability to actually engage life just blossoms, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a beneficence in this struggle. It's not just a dark struggle, is I think what my desire to speak for here is.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Right, so this is still the second section, the separated aspects. Yeah, because when we confront those aspects, we experience something really great. Third paragraph on page 3. On this path, you've experienced that when you successfully work through these blurred areas, you become absolutely safe, no matter what others do or fail to do. No matter how they react, you remain essentially whole, essentially unaffected. Now that's really a big deal, right?
When you start noticing that you're not getting that aggravated by somebody else's
I mean, that means
unacceptable behavior, you're just noticing it, and you're like, okay.
that means that you fundamentally that's a unitive consciousness where you accept the fact that life and creation are fair and joyful.
Yeah.
I
And
suppose, is
also,
that,
and also imperfect.
and imperfect. He says here,
The last paragraph in the
yeah,
introduction.
I do not mean being, you remain essentially whole, essentially unaffected. I mean, this is like a Gandhian awareness,
Yeah.
I think,
Mm.
right? When the Gandhian awareness, your awareness of the hatred of the other, but it doesn't affect you. Martin Luther King, he felt it, it hurt him, but it didn't stop him from feeling his love and expressing his mission, right?
Forgive them for they know not what they do.
Right.
I do not mean unaffected in the sense of being remote and without feeling. I mean the particular negativity in you that you have worked through no longer exists and therefore cannot flare up when others do wrong by you.
Right. That's why it's so important to feel it's something, I say the word pain, but you can give it any name you want. When you feel that, and it's very distinct feeling. Stop and just notice. You don't have to do anything.
If you're
about
not
it at the time, but it's
contributing-
like, oh, I see, I just felt, and they
Gotcha.
come in different levels, because
Right.
you can get a low level little niggle, or you can get something that's really going like this in you. And the more it goes like this in you, the more that means it's inside of you too. And that's where you.
Well,
need
if
to
you're
work.
not contributing your own negativity to the situation, you're unaffected by it in a true way.
Well, that's true.
And you're not hooked into it.
But if
you're not-
if you're getting really niggled by it, then there's still, it's in
Yeah.
you somewhere.
Hmm.
Because otherwise what like I've noticed it with myself, the observation is still there, like, well, that person was just really a jerk. But it's more just like an observation,
Right.
just like looking at a mathematical formula or something. but
There
there's
are
no-
jerks.
Yeah, there are, but there's no emotive response to it.
favorites.
You're not putting
Right.
it personally on you.
Right.
No,
None of
and
them are
even
just
if it is
real.
personal,
Yeah.
even if somebody does something that's
They're all
really not
here.
nice.
All right,
to me,
is everybody online getting this?
You know, I don't,
All right,
I notice it and it's not nice, but I don't,
all right.
it's.
Yeah, okay,
it's-
so
And that's what
just
the
to,
story
I mean, it's sort of like water off a duck's back, that expression. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that was really not a nice thing, but I don't, that's it. I just see it and, okay. They must be having a bad day or
all right, and
whatever,
then,
you know?
so he says, you may be hurt or angry, but in an entirely different way than when your own unresolved
There you
faults
go.
and flaws are triggered off
There you go,
Exactly.
triggered,
by
that's the best word.
outside
I use
circumstances.
pain, but it's triggered, that's a good one.
So you no longer depend on perfection in order not to face your imperfection.
Exactly, the kind
Yeah.
of like, if you're sitting on the beach by
Yeah,
yourself.
can you explain that, Tracy?
Which one?
You no longer
You don't
depend on
demand it.
perfection,
Well, I mean,
uh,
that's,
to not to face your imperfection.
right, you no longer, so, I mean,
What, in order to stay in a good space, let's just use basic terminology, you no longer need everything and everybody to also be in a good space and not to be doing things that are irritating you.
Mhm.
You know, because most people can stay in a pretty decent space when they're in a very idyllic kind of situation. Like I
Mm.
said, you're on the beach, you're looking at the water,
Mm.
nobody's around, nobody's, bothering you or getting into your space, sitting too close to you on the beach or saying a mean word. You're just there and you're able to sort of like meditate and commune with the water. You have a cold drink. Most people, I think, can probably, some people probably can't. Probably their thoughts start becoming negative even then, but most people probably can. But as soon as like somebody might walk by and like kick sand in their face, they're not going to like it. And they're going to, so what the guide is saying is that once you get to the point that you don't depend on everything else being perfect and everybody else being perfect in order for you to maintain your center,
Right.
you can maintain your center in the middle of the raging storm.
Right. Now, just one thing to add to that is take exactly what Tracy says, exactly, and now apply it to the subcomponents of who you are, because there's a person in you that is kicking sand. There's a person in you that just got kicked sand. There's a part of you that's, oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, I'm godly. I can handle that. That sand's nothing. There's all of these different components. And as you sit there, what do you identify with? What's arising in you in this instant? What's arising in you in this moment? Which part of you is speaking? Each one of those parts of you is a valid part of your consciousness, which is engaging into the dance that we are. but it just doesn't stop on our individual self. And that's where the fragmentation comes, right? So in the exact same way that we go, oh, it's me against someone else, or it's me against that guy who kicks the sand. No, no, no. Inside every day, there are people kicking sand inside your own head. And it's really important to notice that, because otherwise you're at war with yourself.
Yeah, there was this really cool animated movie, Disney movie called Inside Out. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it's exactly about this Disney movie Inside Out,
And it doesn't need
in
to be
which
today, by
everyone
the way.
has these characters inside themselves.
Yeah.
Always emotion.
Oh, I have to watch
Yeah.
You
that.
saw it, right?
No, it's a great
Yeah, yeah.
movie. Yeah.
It's like
Inside Out.
some
I
real
wanna watch it.
spiritually aware person put that
Very.
together.
Yeah.
Like Avatar.
Can I ask
Yeah.
you a question about this? 'Cause I
Inside Out.
Yes.
This
The Disney
particular
movie?
sentence,
Yes.
you no longer depend on perfection
Mm.
in order not to face your imperfection. So
Mm.
I'm having trouble understanding this. And I think that maybe it's because it's not being fully said, because it is italicized, and so that causes me to pay particular attention to it. So what it brings to mind for me is that people who are not able to accept the fact that they're human, they make mistakes. They make mistakes. And so they have this false notion that they're perfect, you see, and therefore they can't face their imperfections, and they can't accept imperfections in others. So these individuals have a very hard time forgiving. They
Well,
hold on to everything that's ever happened to them because they're in this cycle that they're perfect. And they need to remind you of your imperfection, but they're not able to see it in themselves. That's what comes up for me.
Well, I think that's really, you're talking about the idealized self-image, I think. In other words, one has a conception of oneself as being perfect, and one desperately holds on to that concept. And so because of that, you deny your imperfections.
Yeah, pride and arrogance.
Pride and
It's a
arrogance.
bitch. It really is. It catches you when you ask these
Do you
respectful-
think it's referring to, he's referring that here?
Well, I
as
think
well?
it's partly that. I think that
It's painful for people to face their imperfections. It
it's
hurts.
painful to face your imperfections.
When I first started Pathwork 10 years ago, one of the first lectures I read was, one of the suggestions was to just say a mantra. I want to know the truth about myself. I don't remember which lecture it was in, but I'm sure you all have read it too numerous times.
Mm.
And I went around, I think, for 2 years, and I said, if I said it once, I said it 10,000 times. I want to know the truth about myself.
Mm.
I want to know the truth about myself. And it was the most painful 2 years of my life, because seek and you will find. And I was shown where I was imperfect and where I needed a lot of showing up. And I wasn't aware of it before I started Pathwork, because I always thought I was a pretty good person, you know, I'm nice, I'm truthful, and kind, you know. But then when I started down on the path, I was like, oh my God, you're not so fast, Alphonse. You know, let's take a look at this, this, and this. And it felt physically like I had like a dagger right here. I literally felt like something poking through my solar plexus for 2 years. It very seldomly dissipated, like painful, because I was constantly seeing one thing after the next after the next. I mean, the list was endless, and I was making a big list, and it was like I ran out of paper because there were so many things about me that needed attention. And finally, after like 2 years, a lot of times I was really in a meditative state swimming, because I swim, you know, I swim a lot, and that's an easy time to really get into a deep meditative state. And I'm swimming and I'm saying, I want to know the truth. There was something good that came up, like one good thing, and I was like, oh my God, you know, it was such like a nice moment that my higher self showed me one thing about myself that was good, because there had been 2 years of, I still have a list. I'm not kidding. This is not like false modesty. It is so long that it was mind boggling. And I really, and I really was, I mean, when I started, it's been 10 years now, I really was a good person. I mean, Joel can tell you, I didn't lie, steal, chill, you know, I wasn't a bad person. I wasn't mean to people. You know, I was honest. I was I mean, you know, on the surface,
But boy, as soon as I scratched that surface, I couldn't believe it. I was so shocked. I was so surprised at how many things inside of me that were
Mm.
less than, that certainly needed some
Needed work.
attention,
Yeah.
and
Can I
varying
ask-
its
can I ask you a
Okay,
question?
yeah,
Sure.
go ahead,
Really,
Mary Jane.
really quickly.
Yeah.
When you were searching that,
Yeah.
the truth about yourself, and you saw that there were those areas that you weren't so good and kind, were they to others or more to yourself?
No, to others.
To
Well,
others,
it mostly manifested, it wasn't so much that it manifested in actions. I had that in terms of, because there's thought, words, and deeds. But what I had was tremendous negative thoughts,
Mm.
hateful thoughts, hateful thoughts about this one, that one, this one, that one. Now, I didn't say it to them. I didn't act on it. So, I mean, at least on the first level, I think the Pathwork says, first first thing to do is to stop being bad on the surface level, then you have to work on your thoughts and your words, I guess. Don't say anything mean. And then the thoughts, and then the feeling, So it wasn't that, I was physically being mean, or, saying mean things, but the negative thoughts were, it was unbelievable how I was, how hateful I was, and how not judgmental wasn't so much. It was mostly just, it wasn't judgment, it was hateful. It was hateful thoughts.
Destructive.
I think
bitter.
Marion
bitter.
can relate to this, because you often talk about, you're like, you want to kill them, you want to throw them off the bridge, but you grab the hand of your God and you're like, okay, this, and mostly I've listened to you now for 10 years probably, or many, however we've been, and I know it triggers you with, especially with your grandchildren, because you were there, you have 4 grandchildren, and I know, because I have 2 now, and you tripping over yourself when they were little, babysitting to the point that you were falling on your face, and now that they're older and they don't need that kind of intervention, it's like, well, where are they, and that can make you mad, it's like, we're those kinds. So I know you've experienced those, maybe you want to talk a little bit about this, your own experience.
Okay, I just want to just
we're not
wrap
gonna-
up the lecture, and
Okay.
then we can all talk a bit about it a little bit. Yeah, let's go back for a minute, top of page 4, what Kevin was talking about, the different aspects of ourselves. And this is something the guide says, that there are parts of ourselves that want very different things. It is almost as if we had many individuals within ourselves. Guide says, and this is the thing, thus, out of a lack of knowledge, knowledge is developed, right? I mean, this is just growth, right? I mean, when a plant grows the wrong way and finally figures out how to get toward the light, it's learned something, when you keep touching the burner and your hand is hurt, and then you stop touching, you learn something. So, I mean, the process, out of a lack of knowledge, knowledge is developed. I mean, I guess that means that if you keep trying something enough, you'll figure out that, it wasn't so smart, and you'll figure out another way to do something. You'll develop knowledge about your circumstances.
And if you're not, I mean, the lesson will keep coming.
Correct.
again and
Well,
again.
that is really,
The universe is gonna continue acting.
right.
It's gonna be up to you
Right.
to be ready or not ready
Exactly.
to accept that.
and I mean, that's
Teach
the,
them lesson.
that's the
I would
big-
even, so I would even change universe to our essence. So the essence of you, not the individual,
that's
is
the-
going to remind you that you're selling your soul.
right,
short.
that's the big lesson of
Yeah.
the incarnations, and how
Yeah.
we have to learn.
Yeah.
Eventually we do get it.
Your very
It might take a
essence.
long time. Eventually we're going to get it. But I also think that, that's another metaphor that you see in literature, short
Yeah.
stories, science fiction,
Oh,
which is someone is dumped into an unfamiliar situation. They have to figure out the rules.
Yeah.
Right. So out of a lack of knowledge, knowledge is developed. Out of the darkness, light develops. The essence, even in the darkest, most ignorant part, is the essence of knowledge and light.
The seed is always there.
Right.
The divine seed.
So in other words, the guide says that every particle of consciousness can be transformed
because it has knowledge.
because it has knowledge. There
Latent
is
knowledge.
consciousness. And that applies to matter also. I mean, matter is also an aspect of consciousness that are not purified.
It doesn't need to harness another part of you to learn.
Right.
It needs to harness its own knowledge.
That essence must express from within itself, not from an aspect outside itself already in possession of wisdom and light. So when the knowledge and light are brought forth from within your own limitations, purification is thorough, reliable, and real. Then true independence from one's surroundings is being established, and thus true freedom. Then each particle, each aspect of consciousness has brought forth its own, quote, minuscule godness, unquote, so to speak. And that is the meaning of the anesthesia with which you enter your life, into your life. It is your struggle for your essential light that gradually and surely diminishes the anesthesia and awakens you to who you really are.
Many people have a tendency to not want to equate godness with themselves. They run from it. But there are so many opportunities that we're given.
Okay, so the last section of the lecture is about how one experiences a higher state of consciousness when one does the work of purification, when one does the work of allowing these negative particles to manifest and going through them, understanding what their lessons are for us. First of all, he says that you start being able to recognize other people's negativities and it doesn't affect you. You don't hook into it. And rather than being enmeshed in a war with other people, you start having compassion and love for them, even if they're expressing negativity, because you are able, because of your dedication to this process, right? You're able to zoom out and see them as they are, more than an adversary or more than, so, you're not in the arena anymore. The ego is not in the arena. You've zoomed out. That's what he says on page 4. Then he talks about the last item here, sort of, kind of, is focusing. Last 2 pages are talking about focusing. That one has to focus deliberately into the self. The focusing will yield to connections to listening and hearing. Most people don't want to do this kind of internal focusing. He says, a new focusing can set in. You can begin very deliberately to listen into the inner universe, the place from which all wisdom flows into your outer being. It is a gradual process, yet it can be sudden in its manifestation. The process sometimes seems to be interrupted because it often disappears at the initial stages, so that the experience can appear to have been a dream. The state in which you hear the inner voice must be fought for in a positive, relaxed sense. It must be gained and regained, for it is lost over and over again. So that's sort of like, the sparks spreading out from the creative center into the void. They flicker on, they flicker off, they lose themselves, they reignite. As the guide says in many lectures, quote, spiritual awareness has to be fought for. And as he says, you can't expect that for the amount you're going to invest to buy a shack, you're going to get a mansion, right? There's a quote in the lecture. You can't expect that if you don't fight for spiritual consciousness, you're going to achieve it. You're not gonna, if you're expecting a mansion, but you're only putting out the effort to buy a shack, you're only going to get the shack. So then he talks in the last paragraph on 4 about how it's very difficult for people to achieve this inner focus, to motivate themselves to focus inwardly. Many of those who are developed enough to do this and could succeed don't even try. Their unresolved problem may be fear of ridicule and disapproval from the world around them. They lack courage to establish the inner self as the true center of individual life. The whole of humanity is conditioned to focus only on certain phenomena, outside and inside, at the exclusion of other aspects of reality, until only that which is in their focus seems real. A whole world exists around you, which you do not see or experience. It seems like a fantasy when you hear it discussed. The limitation of perception is the result of a conditioned reflex in focusing, which in turn is the result of an anesthesia. So that's another thing that we have to try to dispel in our reawakening, which is to overcome this conditioning that mankind is embroiled in and folded in. And finally, then page 5 is the last page, because then there's just a paragraph left. At the beginning of such a path, if you listen into yourself, you probably hear nothing and may become convinced that there is nothing but emptiness. Or perhaps you hear occasionally the voice of the childish, demanding negative self. Then, of course, you are convinced that this is your final reality, which frightens you. And so you avoid facing the negative self even more until later, when perhaps you learn to make room to listen deeper, and so contact levels of unimagined inner reality. Question and challenge your negative voice, confront it, identify it without being identified with it. Learn not to allow it to control you, not to act it out, even as you acknowledge the existence of this voice of selfishness and meanness. Now, this reminds me a great deal, of Eva's own discussion of her own work, struggle to challenge the guide, where she first listened to like random voices, emptiness, stuff that didn't make any sense. And she kept on perceiving and asking, is this the truth? And purifying herself too. And finally was able to let in the wisdom of the guide, after a period of experiencing negativity, negative voices, not knowing, emptiness. So that's like a model for all of us, that it's difficult, but that's part of the whole endeavor of focusing that he talks about, right? That we have to focus on the inner voice and the reality of the inner voice, allow the negativity to come up, see it, unify it, express it, and then we can get to a deeper level, the unitive level. So the guide says, the negative voice must be confronted, it must be questioned. Question the voices of meanness and malice, your stake in seeing others as bad and not wishing to make room even to doubt this. Simultaneously see that you, or a part of you, doubt the beauty and trustworthiness of the universe. Question the voice of fear. Question its lack of faith and confront it sincerely. Then the ongoing voice of God will be heard, and you will recognize it. You will rediscover that it has always spoken to you clearly and beautifully. You simply could not hear it before because it could not push itself through as long as you deliberately focused away from it. All right, so the guide then kind of summarizes the lecture. He says, focusing is deliberate both in a positive and in a negative sense. In a positive sense, you had to be born in anesthesia, having forgotten what you know, to purify totally all aspects of the self. Had you always heard the divine voice, purification could not have taken place. You would not have been able to focus on the negative or deal with it. It would have been quieted down and swept along. In a sense, focusing away from the divine voice is the anesthesia that yourself deliberately chooses for the incarnatory process. In the negative sense, deliberate focusing away from the divine voice is due to the power you give to the negative self that rejects any rule but its own. The negative self does not want to know itself, yet the divine voice leads the negative self to know itself. Yeah. So that I think is the summary of the lecture. I think we really went into it a great deal with a lot of comments and valuable observations. Does anyone there out in cyberspace want to say something?
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Marsha. Here.
And again, the question is maybe kind of like, again, it's kind of maybe skeptical questions just to, because there's some kind of an assumption. And I wonder, yes, just an open questions. It talks about, and I understand why, when we experience something, we truly feel it. It's not just knowing it on a cognitive level, it's just kind of theoretical. And obviously, I mean, this knowing really make it very, very real. But first of all, if I believe in reincarnation or not, I don't know. But we can ask that question, why and this is, I don't know if you can answer that question, why kind of like we said here in that lecture is that we have knowledge, but we don't have the feelings. Why is that? At what level, you know, we have some knowledge. We all know that in reality, we are very limited in knowledge. We are very limited in feelings. There is a lot of that. It's enough in our life, you know, we don't have to go to even previous life to be limited. Now, regardless of that historical meta philosophy of why is that, the work is the same. Again, the underlying work, regardless of that we need to try to uncover the hidden, the shadows, to go through that, to bring it to life. And we know that we always increase our level of knowledge, even in that universe, and we continue developing a greater level of emotion, which is much harder. So I'm just kind of asking that question.
Yeah, well, I think that you're talking about, there's a couple of different kinds of knowledge that, it comes to mind that, the idea that you can know something, but you have not processed it, you haven't integrated it into
You can't feel it yet.
you can't feel
That's
it
what you
yet.
said earlier, not-
That
I have that
is
all the
certainly,
Very,
that is very bedrock to psychology, psychological awareness, spiritual awareness, right? That's the whole thing, Wilhelm Reich, bioenergetics, which is that, hey, I may know that I hate my mother, but I really can't feel it. It doesn't mean anything. I have knowledge that I resent somebody, let's say, but if I don't really feel it, I can't really deal with it. But I think that when the guy talks about knowledge in this lecture, he doesn't really mean that exactly. I think what he basically means is awareness, full awareness, emotional, spiritual consciousness of something that we can somehow rediscover. Does that make sense? Is there's a distinction between those?
I think there is in logical work. I mean, there is awareness.
Yes.
But there is acceptance, which to me is a little bit different. We can know something. I know that people are imperfect. I'm imperfect. I don't accept that.
Yeah.
There is a joke that I always tell my clients that what is the difference between a psychotic person and an erotic person? A psychotic person, clearly, it's kind of delusional. And so if you ask a psychotic person how much is 2 + 2, what the answer that he's going to tell you is?
4?
No. If he knows it's 4, but
Yeah.
psychotic is delusional, so you're going to say 5, 7, 8.
Okay.
But if you're going to ask an erotic person,
Erotic?
neurotic. With my accent, it's very hard to tell.
Neurotic.
Neurotic person, if you're going to ask them, if you're going to ask them how much is 2 + 2 is, what they're going to answer is
4.
4, but
But I'm not sure it is.
no,
Feels like 5.
4, but it.
they say it's 4, but they don't accept the answer.
Man, I tell you, I've been getting 5 all my life.
Yeah, so they would know cognitively, but they don't accept.
Right,
I think we are all challenged by that knowledge of knowing the answer, but not accepting it or not feeling it.
Yeah.
So
Not feeling it, that's
Not feeling
what
Not feeling it or not-
I'm that stuck almost in that.
so
I know it.
You're
but I
not sure
can't-
if it's 4 or 5.
Oh my God, and it's frustrating
Feels like
because
5.
when you can't feel it, but you know the truth, that's a very difficult stage to be in,
Yeah.
and that's where I'm in.
There's a lot of cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
You can connect the intellect with
No,
it.
because I know the truth at this point, but in many
Intellectually.
instances, I don't feel it. So it's like,
That's
and
the
so
delusion.
that creates a lot of cognitive dissonance
Wow.
in me because I can't, can't bullshit myself anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I know the truth.
I
now.
always say it feels real, it feels real, but it's not the truth.
Yeah. No.
That's the truth.
That's good.
Yeah, emotional knowledge is not knowledge of truth, but it is your current experience.
But if
For
you're able,
sure.
but if you're able to integrate that knowledge on a deeper level, then it's gonna be transformed to be truth.
Exactly, because context changes.
Yeah.
That's the only difference.
Well, we have to tunnel through these, whenever something, as Tracy would say, pings you, when you feel a charge about something, you know that you haven't
There's
really
something there.
penetrated to the truth. You don't really know, something is not, you're not at peace with it, so you have to examine it.
And the guide says from the lecture one, that feelings are slow learners, so I've known that, first we're gonna get up in our head, but the feelings, they change by an organic process. And you can't force it. There's nothing you can do but just be patient and let the feelings catch up with what you know to be the truth. But boy, when you're in that stage, it's a tough stage. Because sometimes I feel what I know to be true, and other times I don't feel at all what I know to be true.
Yeah. Well, many say the energy of emotions or feelings are held within the body, and the body is a denser vibration.
Yes.
And so it's going to take time for the
Yes.
body to release that energy or those knots or those obstructions. And so if you can get rid of at least the story associated with the emotions, then at least it just becomes a sensation. And then those sensations can be dissipated by recognizing where those sensations are arising within the physical body. Some people that are more physical or more associated with the physical can heal that way better. And others that are more associated with the mental or the emotional will heal a different way.
Right, so what I do is I just keep telling myself, when I catch myself and I just keep saying, well, Tracy, that's not the truth. And then to use another word for Marion, the feelings will start to pixelate. So then but I mean, I've been at this every day of my life for 10 years. I'm not a casual path worker. Every day. And it's, the progress is very slow and painful, but there, I can feel it. I can feel it happening. Thank you, God.
Okay. All right. Anybody else in cyberspace want to, Barbara, do you have something on your mind? Pam, Stephen, Ava?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yes, I want to,
Till next
can I say something?
take it easy, buddy.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, Moisha is leaving, so taking off here.
Okay, nice to see you.
Sorry about the camera work.
Can I say something?
Of course, go ahead.
Okay. A few things about the knowing. As I perceive it, that's the knowing with a capital K, which means that there is no doubt when this knowing is coming towards any one of us. I mean, it's the knowing in all levels, all the levels, energetically, in the thoughts, in the emotions, in the spirits, when everything is integrated. So this is the knowing. Otherwise, it can be some doubts about knowing, but it is not the knowing. And when it comes, it comes. I mean, you know it when it comes. That's about the knowing. Now, I wanted to add something about the all kinds of pieces that we have in ourselves. It can explain the fact that sometimes there is a big no current in one thing in our life and a yes current in others. So we can be, we can be very confused. How come there is a yes current and a no current in the same entity? So yeah, it is the same entity, but this entity has so many sub-entities, and those sub-entities are just talking, each one separately in its own way. It can be very discouraging in a way that, so I have to go through the pathwork with each entity by itself. In a way, yes.
Yeah, I think that's what the guide is saying in this lecture. You're right, distressing as it may be. Yeah, we have to take those aspects and try to purify them.
Recognize distress only arises because we identify with a given entity. Distress cannot arise if we can.
Can you say that again?
Distress only arises on behalf of the entity that we feel as though is us and we identify with. As difficult as it is to get into that space, and believe me, it's not easy. It's far from easy, but distress or any emotion will arise on behalf of an identity that feels as though it must posit its existence in this manner or in this framework as an important corral of, I guess the way I would look at it from this is of consciousness. But that's only our opportunity right now to see beyond that. That's all. So when the feeling arises when any feeling arises, always ask the question, upon whose behalf are you arising? What part of me are you arising from? Because I wish to know that part better. That's all.
Thank you. Marion, Stephen, any thoughts? Juan? Go ahead, Marion. Oh, Stephen, you were going to say something?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that
Pick on you.
this concept of knowing, I don't know, I find it very elusive, actually. There was a woman who wrote a book, Byron Katie, some of you may know of her. She said, first thing you ask is that true?
Yeah.
And it's very hard to know what's true and what's not true. So I don't really, the older I get, the more I know I don't really know. So, and it's given me a lot. I'm sorry.
And that's happening to me too. The more I get, the more I know I don't know.
And it's been a relief for me. So I've actually just observed more than, know. And recently, I've always thought of myself as a pretty secluded guy who didn't get too involved with people and sort of traveled my life to be separate from people. And it was recently my birthday, and I had an outpouring of, and my friend Juan is one of them, of cards and good wishes. And I'm thinking, where's all this coming from? I mean, like, who am I? Am I the guy that I perceive of myself? Don't bother me. I don't want to know you. Or I'm really a decent person that people see. I don't know. Am I all of the above?
I know.
But, I spend my days just thinking about it. I think, I think we touched on it. All of us are very courageous to even come here to this planet. This is a tough place to be. And
Stephen,
it really is. It's painful.
yesterday was Alan's birthday too.
Whose birthday?
Alan's.
Boy over here.
Oh, wow.
Boy.
August
This
23rd.
boy, this boy.
Aki,
Happy birthday.
You too, Stephen.
Happy birthday. It's great.
Happy birthday, Stephen.
Birthday.
Thank
Say
you.
happy birthday.
Wow, that's really great. Happy birthday. Look at this. Look how friendly I am. I can't be me.
Yeah, man, told you.
Which part of me is this friendly guy
Puppy.
that's sitting here thinking I'd rather be watching baseball or something like that? But anyway, so, I was recently on a webinar of a group, and the usual me was, this guy not this group. This guy talks too much. This guy says a lot of stuff that's meaningless, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just watching myself do all this. And it was kind of amazing. And then, I started to reach a point where I didn't see these people as people per se, but I felt they were actors and playing a role. And they were playing a role in a play. And this play was on the stage, and they were acting out their roles. And I was able to finally separate the role from the individual. And I felt the role that I disliked the most, that I wanted to shut him up, was the one that I'm learning the most from.
Amen. Amen.
Always the way, right?
So true.
So, I'm a simple guy. I just like to see it in black or white. And, more of that, I can't handle too much complexity.
Hmm.
So, thank you. And happy birthday. Yeah.
Thank you,
wow.
Stephen. You too.
Thank you, Steve.
A loving message as usual. Beverly, are you there? Can't see you.
I'll see it, I'll see it.
Oh, Marion. Yeah, Marion, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, what this lecture, I appreciate the lecture that was chosen because I felt it summarized a lot where I am. So I have nothing to teach anyone else or to expound on anything. I came, I think, really to give and receive empathy for this journey that I'm on, that you're all on. It's so individual. And mine right now is one of being so unmasked even further and unveiled than I thought I could be in this life as a human. I've shared some of that with some people through since March of 2021, being in a hit and run accident and being emergency hip surgery and then blood clot surgery, almost dying from that the next day, and then almost dying from a stroke last October. And so I've been through all of that. I call it the accelerated program. And it's kind of my practice for leaving here. And what happened and what I found from some very good help is that people in my situation who've had this much trauma so close together, that often the mask falls from the higher self and the lower self. And people get very nasty and mean. And that was me. But it was pointed out, I know how to process it. A lot of other people are just nasty and mean to other people so I found that too. It was like this layer of mask, and the mask, of course, covers the higher self and the lower self, both, not just one. And so I found myself, I'm still working on it, but I'm coming through it now. A little bit, the light is coming through of hating everybody that was close to me. So I've had two friends in this building, women I've known for 55 years. One, we raised our kids together, single moms, we really, and she's given me so much. She's so open-hearted. I could not stand to see her. I just was repulsed by her and other people that I know. So my gratitude comes in. I'm finding that in kind of the pyramid of life, the bottom, gratitude, but supports everything. And that is for the pathwork and the concepts that I have integrated in my life of about higher self, lower self mask. And also what led me to the pathwork was my own relationship with my inner, however you want to call it, higher self, Christ itself, whatever. That's what led me to the path, was through guidance. And so that's at the core of my life. That will never leave me. And even if I don't feel that guidance inside, I talk to the guidance, the higher self. And I say, I don't know where you are, God. I don't even experience you. I am slugging through this life in misery and terrible pain and misery. But then I'll get this, oh, I'm talking to God. This is bringing me closer, all of my complaints. So I put on my to-do list every day. I have a to-do list, and then I have across the top my toolbox. It's meditation, a certain exercise I do to get certain energy going through my body. And it goes across the line, a certain mirror exercise of I love you, Mary, and certain things like that. And one of them is I have now complaint sessions throughout the day with God. And I have a personal name for that. A lot of people know I call it Baba. It's the name of God. Baba is my master's name, but that does not a birth name. That word is a name of God. And there's infinite names of God because God has no name. God does not have a name, but we humans give it God a name. And so I have that name, and so I have my complaint sessions, and whoever triggers me that day, whether it's somebody I love or a stranger on the street, whatever, I can say to that God self, I am now going to express what's gotten triggered. Somebody used that word tonight, triggered. Nobody else causes it. That's a grounding in the pathwork, conceptual grounding. The guide said, the conceptual, the roadmap that we've been given is what helps us open up to the deep levels of emotion. So I can say to my God self, I am now going to release, and I'll say, whoever triggered this, So I may release what's been held in my energy field for lifetimes, and especially this lifetime, so that I may be filled with your light, love, and life. I call it the 3 L's. And then I let it rip. And fortunately in the pathwork, I've learned about my main personality type, which grew up very submissive, but I had a wild spirit. What a conflict. The wild spirited Marion trying to be good. What a horrible conflict. So with that, I get aggressive. And so I get really aggressive and mean and nasty, and I let it rip and I get it through my energy field. I ground it. So I'm so grateful for these tools. And then I'm looking at my master's picture, and I swear it's smiling at me, because that Marion, terrific. She went through her aggression to balance with submission. And that's the entry into true self-assertion, both sides of the coin coming together equally. So that's it. So I find none of this joyful things that I go through, I'm going through, things are easing now. I can be with more people and all their faults, and I'm not seeing the faults. I'm seeing their humanness. So it's taken a lot of work. But I know through my complaints and reporting in, it keeps me connected with my divine self, and no one and nothing can take that from me. Not anybody, not my lower self, not my emotional self. Nobody or nothing can take that away from me. So I'm very grateful. However, I'm very lonely. I get scared because I have a very connected time, like I did with my daughter today. But the minute I leave that moment and I'm in the next moment, that other moment doesn't last and keep me happy. I'm stepping into the next moment and I get scared and terrified. So I have a helpline that I call practically every night. I call the New York helpline, and I talk to somebody for 20 minutes on this helpline. I am struggling with hanging on, but that's it. So that's it. So that's my sharing. It's not getting wrapped up. That's my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion.
Thank you.
We still have like 3 people.
That was very deep. Yes.
Juan, you did?
Yeah, we can all talk. Beverly, did you want to say anything?
Well, it's Barbara.
Oh, Barbara.
Yeah, I just want to, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to say, Marion, I'm down the block. You know, let's have anxiety together. So, but I'll tell you, I've had a rough month. A friend that I've had for like more than 20 years, in a conversation told me that she just basically was saying that that I had hurt her in 2 incidences that I was like ignorant of. And, you know, it's sort of like, and these weren't recent. These were like, you know, one of them was quite a while ago. And it was very, it felt like a blow, I felt it like a physical blow. And also, basically, she also said that she needs to have some boundaries from me. And excuse me, we've had a sort of like a relationship. I guess I have to explain, where we have been goals partners. We have met periodically through, you know, to share with each other, what we wanted to do, how, our task, how we're going to do it. And we used to meet monthly, then quarterly, then we were meeting every other, like every 6 months. And it wasn't good. That wasn't working for me. I told her, so I have a second goals partner now. But it made me realize that she had been pulling away from me for quite a while, and I was like ignorant of it. And I feel badly that I hurt her, but I also sort of feel like my mind had like sort of like raced, like this obsessional, like, blaming and this, and she doesn't even trust me. And then on top of it, her partner passed away like in January. And like, I'm the first person she called. I took her out for dinner, you know, in other words, I was like really there for her, you know, and I guess part of the conversation I also shared with her, I felt like, well, you know, I don't know. I feel like you might not be there for me. And she said, well, you could always ask. And so I had always had this feeling of like, this is someone that I would do anything for. And I realized that maybe I had, you know, she's holding a case against me. You know, maybe I had all these illusions. I don't know, but I guess that's so sort of like, that's one of the things that's been going on this month for me. And just to, I feel like one of the things that has helped me though has been meditating and feeling and being able to let these feelings go through me and accept them and, you know, feel my, you know, my pain, my care. What else? And as far as, I don't know, this is just jumping around and getting back to the lecture itself. I do have sort of like a, I don't know, a question, or, you know, I feel like, I think the title, wasn't the title of the lecture something about individual personalities in evolution?
Reawakening from Pre-Incarnatory Anesthesia.
That was it. I thought there was something about evolution and like the role of the individual in terms of the whole, because
Discussed in there, but it was not a title.
not the title.
Last lecture, actually.
So I guess that's the thing. That's, you know, sort of like an issue for me, you know, like, and it was addressed before, you know, talking about like, oh, there are parts of us that are like, you know, breaking away in consciousness and, you know, not with the program or whatever, not feeling the oneness, the love. And I guess I had this thing of like, well, the actual role of the individual, you know, it's you know, it's sort of like, I feel my pain, you know, I relate, you know, I hear Marion talking and I, you know, empathize. And it's like the bridge somehow between us as individuals. And does it mean this, that the conscious, you know, like the consciousness, you know, like I guess the role of the individual is my question. Does that make sense? Can you address that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I think though that, you know, I mean, the only way, what I'd say to that is that, you know, we are all individuals and we are all have a role to play in spreading the light and going out into the darkness, the metaphorical darkness, right? And the way we do that is by purifying ourselves. And the way we do that is by trying to allow these aspects in ourselves, which are fragments, which are in various states of unawareness or low consciousness or negativity. We're trying to accept those aspects of ourselves, bring them out into the light, transform them. So, you know, you could say that individuals have mission in society and in the world that is analogous to that. I mean, you know, there are some people which are called the seekers. I mean, there's people of higher development that are like the higher selves of humanity. Then there's people like, I won't name any names here. The lower selves of humanity. And then there's just a lot of people who are just getting through the day, the masked selves of humanity. So kind of our individual bodies, you know, we are like the microcosm, right? And all of us in society as people are like the macrocosm. Does that make any sense, Barbara? I mean, or is that what you were getting at?
Yes, I guess sort of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big concept. This whole thing about individuality And the
Yes,
mission
it's
is
because
very an
there's-
evolution.
Yeah, there's sort of like this concept of how like, well, we're all one, or that it's, you know, the, that sort of doesn't seem, you know, like the, I don't know. It's, you know, how can we be individuals and all one? But
Oh,
that's what I'm
Well,
saying.
I mean, we all, I think the guide says, we all, each of us have a specific divine attribute that nobody else exactly precisely has. And
Mhm.
that's, like proverbial snowflakes, that's right. So in other words, we know our glorious individuality will complement everyone else
Mhm.
as we develop and grow. So, I mean, we can all be one in the sense that we all have a shared mission, you know, which is to fulfill this plan of bringing light into the darkness.
And we're all connected.
And we're all connected
Like
in,
leaves on the tree.
like, we're all connected to each other because,
The waves in the ocean.
you know, we
Yes.
all
Look at it that way,
share,
yeah.
The
we
waves
all
on the
share
tree.
the divine spark, the divine substance, according to the guide.
Mhm.
It's a big subject, this issue of individuality, evolution. Do you want to say something, Kev?
Yeah, I wish, yeah. Let me add one thing. The unity,
We're running out of power.
I'll wait here, yeah. The unitive consciousness does not need to be in opposition to the individuated self. And so when we identify with the individuated self, it's going to be a purpose. It's going to be purposeful. Okay. And that's where our growth comes, is within the purpose of the individuated self. So each of us, the snowflakes, maybe, I'm not sure, but yes, yeah, in a sense, the snowflakes of each one of us, we each have troubles with different aspects of what it means to be an individuated self that's different apart from God. And that's where our growth and our development comes from. So it may not be explicitly stated within the Pathwork lectures in such a way, but what I've gathered through my walk personally has been that initially the individuated consciousness wants survival, and then it wants structure,
Mhm.
and then it wants achievement, and then it wants relationship, and then it wants context. And then it stops coming here anymore to this physical plane. And so one of those 5 things tends to be the areas that trouble us the most. Snowflakes we are, okay? So if it's relationships that bother us or get our goat and not achievement, well, then we're at that stage, and that's okay. Because after a while, relationship doesn't get our goat anymore. And we start looking towards a different area of integration. So for now, it's okay. For now, it's kind of, one of the priests that I used to see regularly used to say to me that walking any path, whatever it might be, would be recognizing the divine and that we are not yet there presently, and being okay with the not yet there. That's all, day to day. That's all.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, Beverly, did you want to say something?
Not really, just that this has been fascinating and I will want to look at the tape again to see, because there's a lot in it.
Thank you. Thank you, Beverly. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
Pam? Thoughts?
Very good lecture. I was interested in it when it came through, because earlier this week I worked so hard on this project, Bible project, getting it into Hebrew and Excel stuff for so many years. And I just got so frustrated. It's like, I could die tomorrow. And all these years that I've been working on this are for nothing. I mean, you can't leave a sticky note on it and say, you know, and pick it up when you come back, when you reincarnate. And so when it came through, and that's what we were talking about, the amnesia, that you have to start and do everything over again. But I was frustrated this week when I saw that. I thought, oh, I've forgotten about that lecture. So thank you. It's been very interesting.
Thank you.
So I just had one.
Yeah,
one
Joel?
little caveat. Just one little addition to what Kevin expressed so beautifully, which is the challenge for all of us, right? When we're alone, when we're angry, when we're sad, when we're afraid of death, when we're sick, is to remember that the divine presence is always part of us. It's not out there somewhere, right? It's always inside and it's always present. And so we may not feel it, we may be angry with it, but it's always there. And it's just as simple as taking a breath, right? Just taking a conscious breath. And then we're present with the divinity that is us and that we're trying to become as human beings more fully.
Okay, thank you. Mary Ellen.
Mary Jane, but
Mary
that's
Jane,
okay.
sorry.
Well, as per usual, you know, this is all still quite new to me, and so I am challenged by these concepts, and especially again this particular lecture. What was helpful, though, Tracy, was when you were saying about the truth about yourself and going and that's why I asked you about, was that something that you saw that you were feeling, negative feelings of others or yourself? Because what I'm finding is when I do that and I go and you know, with my daily review, which isn't really a daily review, I'm going to say it's like a couple times a week review. When I look at negativity in others and what has triggered me, I'm immediately then drawn to myself and find those same triggers that I'm doing to me. And it's just like,
Right.
and I guess I've never looked at all of this.
Of course it's in you. That's why you're seeing it out there.
Yeah.
You see, you're not
It's a
gonna.
projection.
Yes, see, everything that's inside of us is projected into the external world. That's why the external world is our friend. It provides a mirror.
That's why it's so goddamn irritating.
Yeah. But it provides a mirror for us. So if you you can see what's inside of yourself by looking at the
And
external.
I see it right away.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, because you're open to see it and you're searching for it. So you know you're not you're not hiding from it anymore. Yeah.
It's
No, I
annoying, but
get
it's
it.
wonderful.
But you said, you know, was I doing anything to myself? Of course, the negative thoughts are about myself as well. It's not just, I mean, obviously, life begins and ends with how you feel about yourself. And you project that outwards. So if you feel negative, if you pick up something that you don't like in somebody else, it's just a projection from yourself.
You want to be careful because I witnessed Tracy's process with this. And so the lower self is very tricky. And one said to say, look at me, right? And so, you know, it's just like if we're having a conversation and it's like, well, you know, you tell me something you don't like about me or that you'd like to see me work on, and then I'll do the same for you, right? Well, we're not gonna do it 10 times because by then we would be ready to rip each other apart, right? So we don't want to do that to ourselves either.
Right, okay.
So with the daily review, you want to be careful. It's like, you know, there's only so much that we can digest, right? And so you want to keep plugging back in, or you know, sometimes you got to just give yourself a break.
Maybe it's
and
best
say,
that I don't do it daily.
That's right. I mean, I never did that, and you know, but what I do try to do is if I feel a disconnect, or you know, I feel myself getting angry, or I notice a reaction, what's a trigger, I try to look at it right then and there. But you know, I don't always look at all the triggers. You know,
You'd be too tired by the end of the day.
A lot of them by process because we don't want to see them. You know?
Okay.
You'd be exhausted.
So Juan, you haven't really said much. You want to say something?
Yeah, but I
And
try
then
to
we'll
make
do
a
our
quick-
meditation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I try to be quick, but there's so much in this lecture, guys, and I thank you, Tracy, for selecting it, and you, Alan, as well. There's really so much. It's so beautiful, all that is being said here. But it's just so much material that impacts me, in the lecture. But one of them was basically this anesthesia. Then, when I first heard of this subject, or this, this theory, I always thought, well, why would it would be so easy if I remember, where I left off. And I can start continue to work on that, and I know my potentials and my faults also, and I can work with that. But the way the guy explains it here is so like right on the dot. It's so specific what he says and why it is important to have this anesthesia. And where he says, especially the enlightened aspect need to be asleep to allow the negative one to wake up unaffected by the positive ones. Right? I mean, that's something. It's like, okay, well, I get it now. If those powerful, it's like that powerful energy was awake, of course, it's going to be, blocking, overlapping the negative ones, and we will never be able to go through those. And as you were saying, it really needs to be that way. From the lack of knowledge comes actually, because when you go there and face that, and try to grow that knowledge where there isn't any, or where you think there is any, then you really experience that, and going back to your metaphor when you first started, you need to live through that experience. You need to go through those states, through those stages in your life, go through that suffering, go through the experience of not having, not feeling that you have those ability and that potential. And so yeah, it's really so much about, but that part of the anesthesia is really one important topic that it really impacted me. And I try to go quickly again to this point, referring to what you were saying, what we discussed lately, actually, ironically, this part of the lower and the higher self, right? That's another aspect of this lecture that wasn't talked about much tonight, but it's really there, and it's really, really, really so much in there about, I mean, all the lectures that as we know, this is the work to be done. But I just want to read very quickly, page 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th paragraph, which you read some of it, Alan. It says, it is impossible to refocus on this beautiful voice by skipping over the confrontation with the lower self that also always speaks to you. Your ego has to learn to distinguish between them. The voice of the lower self says, I want it for me. I do not care about others. That part of you believes in a mutual exclusivity, in a division of interest between you and others, and that it must triumph at the expense of others. That part is not connected to the reality that you can have all without depriving others. Isn't that something? I mean, most of us think it's like, oh, okay, no, if I have it, then I have to take it from somebody else. Or, life can be perfect. Well, the guy says we can actually enjoy everything.
Right, the guide actually says, like, as we said in the last lecture, that what enriches you has to enrich others.
Yeah.
And that you can actually have what you want, and the other person also gets what they want. Right. It's not the way it was. Generally, people talk about scarcity, right? It's a zero-sum thing, but it's not. That's especially in the new age. In this time, we have to recognize, on the planet, that we can have these win-win solutions. That's where each of us can have what we need.
Green energy and all this good stuff. Yeah. So quickly I say, that this is the thing that I had a lot of problem in the beginning when I first started in Pathwork, because I know, like the guy says here, the lower self and the higher self, they are both within us, as you were saying earlier. So sometimes, just like, okay, the voice of my intuition, that's what I want, really. I want to live my life guided by my intuition, by my intuitive knowledge, right? But then I had trouble in the beginning because the lower self is there. So sometimes I was confused. Wait a minute, who is talking to me here? I'm feeling this is coming from within.
Yes.
That's where the higher self is, right? So I, but then I started to notice that higher self, when it came from the higher self, that voice, that prompting, felt good, felt harmonious, brought peace, you know, and brought it, and it involved others. It wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my good fortune. It actually had to do with, you know, whoever else was around and, you know, involved. So that way I began to discern, because it says like the ego actually have to discriminate between the two,
Right.
you know, and I just really follow what comes from within. It's like, go with that, because you're going to run into a lot of trouble if you do that, because very often, because of our unworked material in there, we will tend to follow the lower self. I mean, it's easier for us, right? So as I learned to feel and coming into, you know, connect with our those inner feelings, I have come to learn more and more of that good feeling that
Distinguish between the two.
that distinguish between the two, and that you can freely and unafraidly follow, because it brings you that harmony, it brings you that peace, it brings you that inner joy. So you know that this is the way to go. That's pretty want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. All right, my friends. So shall we have our meditation? All right, so we're going to have our 15 minutes meditation. We need a candle.
No. Okay, you get the lights. I'll get these lights. Is that all right, or do you need more light?
That looks good. All right, I'm going to read the last two lines of the lecture. For a long time, the main goal in our meditation was what I called impressing. In one of the basic lectures about meditation, I spoke about both aspects. Impressing, that is instructing, claiming, conditioning, recreating, and expressing. That is listening, hearing, and receiving. The time has come when you can safely focus on expressing. You can learn to listen to the whole wonderful universe, an ongoing alive phenomenon. You dwell in this universe and it dwells in you. You can discover it by focusing on it. You can awaken from your dream state, your anesthesia, my friends. You can become truly alive and know the aliveness that is in you. All right, 15 minutes, my friends.